SSAS Pensions now for coming up for 10 years. And SSAS Pensions were not originally intended for use by property investors. They were designed to be used by normal business owners. And obviously, as we've been encouraged as property investors to do it more through a limited company, then SSAS Pensions have become available to us as property investors. So what I want to start off by doing is just sharing probably no more than 5 slides with you, just to go through and just to consolidate our basic knowledge as to what a SSAS pension is. So just bear with me while I do the screen share, and we should be away. Right, can you see that and hear me? Yeah, okay, so SSAS Pensions. So they're the best kept secret from owner directors of limited companies. I'm not convinced this is working properly. There we go, we've got it up and running. Right, SSAS Pensions are the best kept secret from owner directors of limited companies. Why are they the best kept secrets? Well, I think that will become clear as we go through these slides. So what are self-administered schemes? A SSAS is what's called a self-directed pension scheme, and it's where the members themselves are trustees and they determine the investment policy with regards to the funds that are in the scheme itself. Now, all pensions follow essentially the same basic structure. It's a trust fund with trustees associated with it. But if you're with, say, somebody like Aviva, Scottish Widows, and yet they have a pension, then again, you're contributing into a trust fund, but the trustees themselves are very, very remote. You don't know who they are. And the trustees are responsible for that money. And then they will appoint somebody to invest that money on the scheme members' behalf, and that money will get invested. And then when it comes back, the people that have invested it will take their cut from the funds. The trustees will take their expenses from it, and what's left over is what goes back into the pension pot. But with a SSAS, the members themselves are the trustees. So it could be one person, it could be 2 or 3 people, but you manage the funds. You decide what you invest into, and the returns that come back into the SSAS come gross. Nobody's skimming money off the top. So a SSAS is established under a discretionary trust deed and is registered with HM Revenue and Customs. So every time we register a SSAS pension, we have to apply for a pension tax registration number, and that registers the scheme as an official pension scheme, and then it attracts all of the benefits that are associated with any pension. So we get all the same favourable tax treatment. So any growth from investments that the SSAS makes are free of corporation tax, free of capital gains tax. So the money grows in this lovely tax-free environment. Now, a SSAS is an occupational pension scheme, and as such, it's not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, but it's regulated by the pension regulator. And the pension regulator has a much softer regulatory touch. Now, because the SSAS is not regulated by the FCA, then a financial advisor, a regulated financial advisor, is not going to talk about it. Because if they encourage you to put your money into a SSAS, then you become responsible for those funds, and they can no longer claim fees for funds under management. So there's not many people out there actually talking about SSAS pensions and demystifying SSAS pensions and showing you what you can do with this very, very tax efficient vehicle. So what are the key features of a SSAS? Well, any limited company can act as the sponsoring employer to set up a SSAS. So one of the key things that you have to have in order to set up a SSAS is a limited company. Now, each SSAS can have up to 11 members, and each member is also a trustee of the scheme. It's perfectly possible to have a sole member scheme and a sole trustee. So, you know, if you don't want to be associated with other people, you can set up your own SSAS, you can be the sole trustee, and you manage your funds on your own behalf. Now, SSASs are available to any UK resident over the age of 18. So anybody that's a UK resident and over 18 can be a member of a SSAS. And if you set up a SSAS, then there's nothing to stop you inviting other people to be members of it, providing they meet the conditions that we've got on this slide. And each SSAS will have a scheme administrator for reporting and compliance purposes. Now, it's perfectly possible for you to be the scheme administrator yourself, but it's very usual for a professional trustee to be appointed to fulfill this role. So that in that way, we make sure that the scheme remains compliant with the pension regulator and HMRC at all times. And they will also act as the second signatory on the bank account. They're not going to stop you from judge you in terms of the things that you do, but they're there to stop you from running off with your own money. And believe me, that has been done in the past. So what are the benefits that the SSAS can offer? Well, first of all, protection. A SSAS provides the opportunity for members to build up retirement funds in a tax-free environment and within a discretionary trust. And this keeps the assets fully protected from any company or personal creditors that may arise. Secondly, it gives you total control. The trustees have complete control over investment choice, obviously subject to HMRC permitted guidelines. And unlike a SIPP, which is a self-invested personal pension, assets are registered solely in the names of the member trustees. So they're owned by the member trustees. You also get choice. Funds can be invested individually or collectively, and it increases if you've got more than one member, then you can collectively invest your funds, which increases your purchasing power. And you may draw down funds for personal use for pension purposes. Currently, it's the age of 55. It's going to rise to 57 in 2023. But there's no requirement for you to stop working. You can carry on working and still draw a pension. So key personal benefits. It's building a fund for the future. It gives you complete control. You make your own investment decisions, tax-free investment returns, tax relief on personal contributions, tax-free lump sum when you do retire. So up to 25% of the fund can be taken as a tax-free cash lump sum. And it shelters your assets from inheritance tax. So you're able to pass the full value of your pension fund onto your nominated beneficiaries in the event of a death. And for a business, then if you allow your company to make the contributions on your behalf, then that will reduce the amount of corporation tax that the company will pay. Now, the interesting things for property investors are probably these elements here, that you can lend money to the business. You can make loans to unconnected third parties. You can purchase shares in unlisted companies, and you can even purchase your own shares. But you're also ring fencing funds from creditors. You can purchase and hold directly commercial property, but you can't purchase and hold directly residential property. But there are vehicles that we use which allow us to invest indirectly into residential property. And that's a great benefit for property investors who want to use the funds in their pension to actually grow their property portfolio. And if you are, and a SSAS can actually borrow up to 50% of its own fund value. So particularly if you're using commercial property, then if you're buying, if you've got say £100,000 in the fund, a commercial property is 150, then the SSAS itself can borrow from any source it chooses up to 50% of its value, so another £50,000 that it can use to facilitate the purchase of that commercial property. So that's the basic structure of a SSAS. Now, SSASs have been around since 1973 and have been predominantly used by what I would regard traditional business owners. But with the move by HMRC to encourage by punitive tax measures us to invest in property through limited companies, this has meant that property investors have become owner directors of limited companies and can use SSAS pensions. Now, most property investors will not want to think about investing into the normal kinds of regulated investments. They want to use that money for property investment. And that is perfectly possible, but we need to do it carefully, and we need to make sure that we remain compliant and don't attract quite heavy penalties. I mean, we can be, if we do things wrong, then you can finish up with tax penalties of up to 55% of the values of the investments that you've made. So just before I finish my little slide share, here's my personal details. And I think that David will share these with you anyway, but if you want to contact me personally, then there's my name, my company, my mobile phone number, and my email address. And I'll be more than happy to talk to you personally about anything that you want to do yourself, after this meeting. So I'm going to stop the screen share now. Hopefully we can all be back there. And David, really now it's over to the questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Neil. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate it. Yeah. So that's it all there. I'm sure you may have questions for those that join a bit later. You might actually have questions that might actually be on your mind that you want Neil to answer. I've got a recording of this actually, so at the end of it, I'm going to be sharing it to those that are actually here as well. I'll share it around as well to everyone. So if you have any questions, please do ask now. But I'm just going to ask you. So Neil, thank you for the presentation, by the way. So you mentioned that one can access the pension via SSAS, and then can take it in form of a loan. So can you please talk more into that?
Okay.
So loan in what sense? Is it more of like a loan that I need to get interest? Because traditionally when you get loan, you're thinking about I need to do a repayment on a monthly basis. I need to have interest included in it or something. How does that work? If you don't mind, please talk into that.
When it comes to a SSAS making a loan, there are two types of loans that it can make. Okay, one of them is affectionately known as a loan back. And what this is a loan back to the sponsoring employer. Okay, so when we set a SSAS up, as I said, there's got to be a limited company, and the limited company acts as the sponsored employer. And we make the application for the SSAS to prove that it is an occupational pension, that it's connected with a limited company.
Yeah.
Now, once the funds are in the SSAS can lend up to 50% of its value back to the sponsoring employer. But there are quite stringent conditions associated with it. Okay, so first of all, the loan that we make back to the sponsoring employer has to be done on a first charge basis. So there has to be an asset somewhere that the SSAS can have a first charge on. Okay. Secondly, the loan has to be repaid in 5 equal installments of capital and interest over a 5-year period.
Okay.
And the final one is that an interest must be paid. And the interest that must be paid, HMRC decree that it should be at least 1% above base rate. So currently that's very, very cheap. Yeah. But there's nothing to stop you. They term it as a commercial rate of interest. and they determine commercial as being at least 1% above base rate. So, if you want to charge yourself a minimum amount of interest, well, 1% above base rate. But you could charge a commercial rate of interest. So you could, if you wanted, charge yourself 5, 6, 7%. And then people go, well, why would I want to do that? Well, don't forget you're paying it back to yourself. And interest that you pay is an allowable business expense. So it reduces the amount of corporation tax that you pay. And it boosts your pension fund. And if you're boosting your pension fund, then that's a bigger amount of money that you can lend out next time.
Sure.
So that's the first type of loan that you can make. The second type of loan that you can make is to what's called an unconnected third party. Now, what is an unconnected third party? Now, that's a little bit open to debate. But what, generally speaking, it is that you cannot lend that money to relatives. You can't lend it to companies that you are closely associated with. But if I got a SSAS pension and I got money in, because David and I are unconnected, I could lend that money to David. Okay, no problem at all. And I could lend him 100% of the value of my SSAS. And I don't need to do it on a secured basis, which seems really strange, because if I want to lend the money to my own company, it's 50% of the value of the fund, and it's got to be repaid in 5 equal installments of capital and interest, and it's got to be done on a first charge basis. But if I lend it to an unconnected third party, I can lend 100%, and I can decide what the terms are. I can decide whether I want a first charge or a second charge. I can decide whether I lend that money to you for 5 years, and all you do in that 5-year period is make interest payments to me and then pay me the capital at the end.
Wow.
So it's very, very different, and so it is flexible, and there's lots of different ways that you can move funds from inside the SSAS to outside the SSAS.
Great, interesting. So basically, it's similar to you having this pot of money, which is your pension, which you have been piling up all these years, and you have access to it via SSAS, 50% of it, which you can actually loan to yourself. But then you have the control as to the terms of it, as opposed to you actually going to your traditional loan lending, which you go outside and get, and they be in control of it.
Yeah, you can lend it. You can lend it to outside. Now, Tundi's asked a question. She said, "Is a security required to lend to an unconnected third party?" And the answer is, it's up to you, Tundi. You decide whether you want security. Now, I mean, good judgment would say that yes, you want some kind of security, but you are not required to make security in order for the loan to be completed. But if we make a loan back to the sponsoring employer, we are required by HMRC to have a first charge security. And if we don't have a first charge security, then that would be an unauthorized loan, and we would face a tax penalty of 55%.
Wow, you don't want that. You don't want that. All right, thanks for that. I've got a question here actually from Queen Esther. She says, do I have to have had my pension for a certain amount of years before I can do this? So basically, is there a time, amount of time that I would have held the pension before I can access my pension and use it?
No. Under the pension freedoms, you are allowed to transfer your pensions to any other pension provider of your choice. And because a SSAS pension is registered with HMRC, then it is an acceptable place to transfer pensions to. Now, what most property investors do is as they grow their business, they set up their limited company, they register a SSAS pension scheme. Now, that's not a quick process. Registering a SSAS scheme at the moment is taking up to 6 months to get that tax registration. So you've got plenty of time to think about it while you're waiting for it to be tax registered. And what a lot of people do is once that scheme is tax registered, they transfer in any frozen employment pension. So any pensions that they've accrued through being employed, that were from employers that they've left. So they bring all those pensions in and they transfer any personal pensions in. Now, if you are employed and you're currently in a company pension scheme, then just carry on paying into that pension. Because what you've got to remember is that you're making a pension contribution and your employer is making a pension contribution as well. And that's essentially free money. So keep accepting free money until you decide you're going to sack the boss. And once you've sacked the boss, you then have what I would call a frozen pension. Okay, so what you can then do is apply to have that pension transferred into your SSAS, and you build up that starting fund in that particular area. So really, there's no time requirement in terms of saying you must have held that pension for a certain period of time before you can transfer it. The only thing I would say is, think about transferring it once you've left the employment. If it's a personal pension that you've got where it's only you contributing to it, then that can be transferred straight away. But now, can I just qualify that question by saying, by turning it round slightly, rather than saying, is there a time period that I must have had a pension before I transfer it? I think the bigger question is there a value of pensions that I should have before I consider transferring those into a SSAS or even setting up a SSAS? And I'd probably say that you need to be thinking about 50 to 60,000 pounds, because you've got to think about what you could do with that money. If you had 50, 60,000 pounds in your pension pot, and there are vehicles that we could use where we could transfer that full value outside, so you would have access to it, then you could leverage that up to about 240,000 pounds. And then you've got to start thinking about, well, what kind of returns could I be making on that money? And that would be worthwhile. Excuse my clock, I forgot to stop it.
That's all right.
So that's kickoff. So yeah, they're perfectly, there's no time restriction at all.
Great. Thank you for that. I think what she was saying is because she said she's been with that company, she's been putting money into only 4 to 5 years. But so I think Neil has already answered that, which is really good. So we've got a question from Annie. Annie, I don't know if I pronounced your name well. Is it Annie? Says, I have pension for my workplace. How can I turn it into SSAS?
How do you turn it into a SSAS? Then the simple thing is, well, if it's worthwhile doing it, if you've got a reasonable value, then the first thing that we need to do is, okay, if you've got a limited company, then we can apply to set up a SSAS and get it tax registered. Once the scheme is tax registered, we open a bank account for the scheme, and then we apply to transfer the funds into the SSAS. And that's simply how you transfer a personal pension into a SSAS.
So you have to set up a company first, and then
Well, there has to be an actively trading limited company first of all.
I think this is what you help with, anyways. I mean, when it comes to that, when you're going through this, and when people actually have come to yourself and say, this is similar to what Annie's saying. I've got this, and then obviously you walk them through the process of setting up the company and all of that. Is that part of the package that you actually offer as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I noticed Millie said that I have a pension with 4 different providers. So from what you're saying, it's best to have it all under one provider before transferring into a SSAS. Is that right? Not quite, Millie. You can transfer it all into one provider, but we could just transfer, once you've got a SSAS set up, you can apply to have all 4 of those transferred straight into the SSAS. There is no requirement for them to be all in one place in order to transfer into a SSAS. I mean, some people, as they've left employment, have consolidated pensions into one place. But if they're scattered about into 4 different employers, no, they can just, it's just a case of applying for a transfer value and release documents and just transferring all of those into the SSAS itself.
I can actually talk into that because I work with different employers over my years of in my career, and I remember then I got pension in with Scottish Widow, Legal and General, you know, and the likes, different of them. So I think then what I then did was, because I keep getting this statement from different, you know, providers, and it was getting frustrated. I don't really like paper. Those were the days on when you have papers, you don't have that choice. So what I did, I didn't even read about it. I just thought, how can I? So I called one of them up. I said, is it possible for me to put all my funds, all my pensions, all that? They said yes. So what I did was I took all my my pensions with different providers and I consolidated it into one. One question I'm going to ask though, when I did mine, what I did was I went for SIPP, right? So I took all of my pensions, which I've had over the years, and then I took them into SIPP pension, where I have control over it. So all my shares, stocks, which I actually do, I can do them. I do them myself. So what is the difference between a SIPP and a SSAS?
Okay.
For those, I think you did mention it in your presentation as well. What actually differentiate both of them? I think today's ask question as well. We're going to talk about that, but let's go with that first.
Yeah. So what is the difference between a SIPP and a SSAS? Well, a SIPP is a personal pension. Okay. So you have one and I would have one. Okay. A SSAS is an occupational pension and can have up to 11 members in it. So if we were business directors of the same company, David, then you would have one member position in the SSAS. I would have the other. Okay. So our funds, we could, each of us could maintain individual control of that money. And we could invest it in terms of whatever we wanted to do personally. Or we could decide that we are going to invest collectively. That, you know, let's say we're going to buy a commercial property. You've put £100,000 in, I've put £50,000 in. So we've now got £150,000 that we could use to go and buy that commercial property. Or we've got £150,000 that we could do a loan back, 50% of, back to our to the sponsoring employer. Now with a SIPP, if we wanted to buy, if we were directors of the same company and we wanted to buy the commercial property that we were, let's say that we were operating from, okay, you would have to go and talk to your SIPP provider about whether they would, you know, contribute towards buying that business, that property. I'd have to go talk to mine, and they'd probably both have different interpretations about what they wanted to do and how we wanted to work, and it becomes a bit of a nightmare.
Great. So I think if I understand what you're saying right there, the benefits, one of the benefits of this, I mean, I'm already jumping inside of my heart right there. So it means that we can have 2-3 people coming together that have already built their pensions, right? Say, for example, I've got 50K, someone else has got 50K, another person. We can form a company together, right? Form a company, a limited liability company together, and we can take have access to our SSAS, and then, you know, get a loan against that, and we can all buy properties together as a company.
Yeah, you're going to, you know, it's this purchasing power that you're bringing together. You know, SIPPs are personal pensions. SIPPs are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Okay, and when you set up a SIPP, then you are restricted in terms of what you can invest into, depending on what is on the approval list of your SIPP provider. Now, some SIPP providers will not allow you to purchase commercial property. Others will not allow you to do loans. Okay, so you don't have the same freedoms with a SIPP. You've got an element of self-investment, but not total control over what you can and can't do. Now, I'm just looking at this list of questions, and I like this one that Tundi's put up, right? Isn't there a danger I could lend without due diligence to a third party and lose all my pension fund? And when I say lose, means I have a deal with my cousin, take the cash, and we'll meet in Mexico. Yeah, Tundi, yes, you can. I mean, that's the danger. Now, but you've got to recognise that this is your money, and you know, if you lose it, you lose it, and if you don't return that money, then you've got, you know, your pension fund is gone, you know, and what you do with it, you do at your risk. Now, this is one reason again why we always suggest that you have a professional scheme administrator, a professional trustee, because the professional trustee is the second signatory on the bank account. Now, you know, they're not going to stop you, you know, doing what you just suggested, Tundi, but they will ask the questions and they will just check to make sure that, you know, you are doing something that is correct. And don't forget, they are the second signatory on the bank account. So if they've got any real grave doubts, they won't sign the documents.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's the check that's going to be there, just to make sure, as I said, that, you know, that you don't run off with your own money. And then the second question she's got: if I lend to my business, what does a pension require as security? Company assets or anything else? Now, technically, it should be a company asset. Now, there are a number of SSAS providers that allow you to have put a first charge on a residential property. Now, technically, that could lay you open to an unauthorized loan, because a SSAS cannot own directly a residential property. Now, you're going to turn around to me and say, but we don't own it, we've only got a charge on it, and we would only own it in the event that we defaulted on the loan, and then the SSAS would have to repossess the asset on which the charge is on. Now, that's perfectly correct, but the danger is that HMRC will take a totally different view on that, and they will turn around and say, well, you know, that there is a danger that the SSAS could finish up owning a residential property, and what they will then turn around and say is that this is an unauthorized loan, and that's when you could be liable to a 55% tax penalty. Now, there are a lot of SSAS schemes and SSAS providers which have allowed that to happen. Nobody has actually fallen foul of it yet, and HMRC have not called in anybody on that, but it is true to say that HMRC are taking more interest in SSAS pensions, and particularly SSAS pensions that are being used for property investment. And there is a danger that probably in the next 12, 18 months, that there will be a test case which we'll put through court, and then we'll find out whether that is an unauthorized loan, and whether there are going to be tax penalties flying around all over the place. So you're far better to think about doing it by putting a charge on a company asset.
Great. Thank you very much for that. We've only got probably like 4 minutes or so to go on this now, because I did promise that we want to finish like 45 minutes so that people can go watch the game. So two questions here. One, you mentioned first charge. I'm sorry, like first charge of property. We might have people here that don't understand what a charge on property is. With that, could you talk into that, please, a bit, just to give a bit of clarity?
Well, a first charge is exactly the same as what a mortgage lender would have.
Right.
Okay. So when you take out a mortgage, a buy-to-let mortgage, a residential mortgage, then the lender has a first charge on that asset. And if you default on the mortgage, then they can repossess that asset, sell it, and recover their loan. So it works in exactly the same way. A first charge on a company asset. So it could be intellectual property, it could be a trademark, it could be all kinds of different things. But it would have to have a genuine value.
Yeah. So what it actually simply means is, just to break down a bit, is, say for example, you have £100,000, anyone, and you're owing two people. One person you're owing them £50,000, another person you're owing them £20,000. before you get paid, you're going to be third person down the line. So basically, the person that's adding the first charge, which you're owing £50,000, you pay that person first out of your £100,000. And then the second person that has the second charge, obviously, will get the second priority.
It ranks further down the line.
Yeah, and whosoever is at the bottom of it will now get wherever is less.
We'll get the penny that remains.
That's what it is. That's just to put it very.
But
simple.
I think can I just clarify something that the most common way that you will have seen money being used by property investors is by a third party loan or a loan to an unconnected third party. They're very, very common ways, but there are many, many other ways that we use to move money from the scheme into a position where it can be it can be used for investment purposes by a property investor. And the way that we use those, we do it through what we call genuinely diverse commercial vehicles, GDCVs for short. Now, we've not got a lot of time to talk about those tonight, but it's one of those things that as we talk with a client, as we talk through the process of using a SSAS, setting it up, then we will explore with each individual what their objectives are and establish with them what is the best vehicle for them to use to achieve the goals that they want to achieve through property investment.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Neil. We don't really have much time now. I'll just say, do you mind sharing your details again? Just probably if you can push through that slide where you have your details there, especially for people that want to, have access to yourself and contact you either by email or mobile phone. There you have, right there you are, right there. You've got Neil's details. So if you need to ask specific personal questions with regards to this and how you can take your money out. I'm not saying take your money out, but loan some of your pensions to yourself to start investing in property, which is one of the things. I think the key word is loaning it to yourself. It is basically your money, loaning yourself your money and controlling time. Just reach out to Neil and it will be able to take you through the whole process. So thank you very much for joining, everybody. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I want to stick to the time because I think everyone that already loves football already itchy to make sure they don't miss out any of the games tonight. So thank you all for joining. So yeah, reach out to Neil and we take it from there. Thank you for joining. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.